Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. In this episode, I will talk about the hateful conspiracy of cultural Marxism and Project 2025. I could have put this in the previous episode, but I decided that it deserved consideration by itself. And I think that will become clear as I go into it right now. For those of you unfamiliar with the term cultural Marxism, it is a continuation of the Nazi concept of cultural Bolshevism, which was in its time a neo-Nazi, or I should say a Nazi conspiracy theory, which argued that Jews are trying to take over the world. And one of the supporting planks of cultural Bolshevism was that fraudulent document, the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which was based on a 19th century novel, which was distorted to sound like a conspiracy of Jews to take over the world. Very, very sad. I think anybody who is of Jewish background like myself, or even not of Jewish background, who cares about justice and equity and human rights, should immediately reject the idea of cultural Bolshevism. Sad thing, cultural Bolshevism is still with us, sort of, but under a new name, cultural Marxism. Now, a lot of people have heard that term used, but don't know where it comes from. It comes from neo-Nazism. It is based on the idea, again, a repetition of cultural Bolshevism, that Jews are trying to take over the world, sometimes modified a bit, placed into a conservative Christian context, that Jews are trying to secularize the world, to Marxize the world, if that's a word, to take away Christian values, whatever Christian values are. I guess it depends on which Christianity you're talking about, and replace them with the values that were supposedly held by the Frankfurt School theorists. Frankfurt School, that is a term which refers to members of the School for Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany, which still exists, although it's different than it was before World War II. The people who were in it were people like Theodor Adorno and Herbert Marcuse and Erich Fromm and a host of others. And many of them, what they did is they attempted to combine aspects of Marxism with aspects of Freudianism. That was one of the basic premises of much of the work of the Frankfurt School and people who worked at that institute in Frankfurt, Germany. Well, when Hitler came to power, many of those people who were Jewish justifiably were afraid for their lives. And so they left Germany and came to the US, mostly New York City, but in the case of Herbert Marcuse, Waltham, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston. And all of them, including Marcuse, were Jewish because they were looking for some asylum from Hitler's tyranny that was taking place in Germany. So they found some degree of comfort and protection in the US. After the war was over, the majority of them returned to Germany. Herbert Marcuse was an exception. He remained a professor at Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts. In fact, I had a friend who had Marcuse as one of his professors late in Marcuse's career. Now, on to the specific point of what I'm going to talk about here. I had a psychiatrist, and I won't mention his name for obvious reasons. He's now deceased. I assume his wife is still alive, although I don't know that. I have known two neo-Nazis in my lifetime, and this psychiatrist's wife was one of them. The other one I will not mention. It's irrelevant to what I'm talking about here. She hated me. She despised me. And I don't think that my psychiatrist realized it. And I did not mention that to him. I did not want to ruin his relationship or even tarnish his relationship with his wife. I felt that would be improper, especially for me as his psychiatric patient to do that. However, every once in a while, my psychiatrist would mention things that are a product of the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory, and I would point out to him what they were, and he was always very apologetic. In other words, he, unlike his wife, was not a neo-Nazi. Now, was he on the far right? Certainly, but not that far right. But unfortunately, he did not know enough to realize who his wife really was. And I did not want to be the one to tell him. And I still think that was a good decision on my part. It was not my place to put myself in the position of telling him who I thought his wife really was and what she genuinely believed. But I can give you an example of it. When my psychiatrist died, and I had to find a new psychiatrist, which I did, my psychiatrist contacted my previous psychiatrist's wife, who was also his business manager, asking for my psychiatric records, and he never heard back from her. So that was an example of her. She genuinely hated me, and I don't know why. I was always nice to her, but I assume it was because she knew that my ancestry was Jewish. But there are other reasons why I believe very strongly that she was a neo-Nazi, and I don't want to get into them here. I think that would be off the topic. But in any event, cultural Marxism is connected with this forgery called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. It is a forgery because it is based on a 19th century novel that has nothing to do with Jews. Someone took that novel and turned it into a prediction of Jews taking over the world. If you have ever heard the term, for example, New World Order, used by someone on the far right, that is an example of the infiltration of the cultural Marxist conspiracy theory, because that is a direct reference to the protocols of the elders of Zion. Now, do most people who use that term know that it is? I really, really doubt it. But that shows you again how strong the influence has been of the cultural Marxist conspiracy theory, a neo-Nazi conspiracy theory on the far right, especially on the far right here in the United States. And so I wanted to mention that. That's basically cultural Marxism, and it's hateful. It assumes that Jews are trying to take over the world and destroy Christian values, to replace Christian values with, I guess, what they think are Marxist or secular or Jewish values. It appears to me that they kind of conflate those together, secular, Marxist, Jewish. They really don't make much of a distinction between them. Now, is it true that in the United States, most Jews are secular? Yeah, if you define secular as non-religious, non-practicing Jews, that is true. Is it true that most Jews in the West are Marxists? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So there are some big holes in the cultural Marxist conspiracy theory, but in my experience, neo-Nazis don't seem to care about those holes. They care about whether they can make an argument and whether that argument will be effective in accomplishing their agenda. So at this point, I am going to read for you an excerpt from the Project 2025 book, and I'm going to hopefully do a better job this time than I did the previous time. We'll see if that works. This is let me see over here. I keep on messing up with this thing, and I for some reason I don't seem to be able to successfully find it when I look for it. Give me one more shot at it. Put this up here, and now let me go ahead and try to do it again and see if that works. Again, this is all new to me. I'm not having much success at this particular thing, but there it goes. Okay, so I think that worked. You should be seeing at the bottom of the page Paul Dans, who was the director of Project 2025. Now, he wrote this in 2023. So I'll read to you the part of this that is relevant. This is, again, from the Project 2025 book. It's not 1980. In 2023, the game has changed. The long march of cultural Marxism through our institutions has come to pass. The federal government is a behemoth, weaponized against American citizens and conservative values, with freedom and liberty under siege as never before. The task at hand is to reverse this tide and restore our republic to its original moorings. It is too great for any one conservative policy shop to spearhead. It requires the collective action of our movement. With the quickening approach of January 2025, we have 2 years and one chance to get it right. Now, why he thinks it's one chance, I don't know, but generally people who are polemicists will try to frighten people and say, this is your only chance. Let me go ahead and stop the screen share. Yep, that did work. So hopefully when I go back and look at it, it will be the way I wanted it to be, and you will have seen that screen along with me. That is very concerning to me, because this guy who was appointed the head of 2025, the 2025 project, obviously is no moron. He knows what he's saying. He knows that cultural Marxism is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. He would have to, and yet he's using it. And so I think that what we need to be aware of is that Project 2025 at its foundation is at least partially anti-Semitic. I'm not saying entirely, but at least partially anti-Semitic. That thing that I just read came from the preface to the Project 2025 book. So that's how they're starting the thing off. To me, that is very, very frightening. As somebody from an Ashkenazi Jewish background, although I do not follow the religion of Judaism, as those of you who follow my podcast will know, I am very concerned by that. And I think that everyone, whether you are an American, a resident or citizen of some other country, whether you're from a Jewish background, a Christian background, a Muslim background, a Buddhist background, or something else, you should share my concern. I think as human beings, we should all look out for each other. And certainly this project is very, very dangerous. It is, as the director makes clear, an anti-Semitic project at its foundation. Why would the guy use cultural Marxism in the preface to the book? Well, he was making a point. He was signaling. He was sending a signal to people who know what cultural Marxism is. In other words, I am on your side. So again, I think that that is something we should be aware of, not to panic about. Panicking never does any good anyway. It just makes people confused, disoriented, to the point where they don't know what to do. Nobody should panic, but we should be aware of it. We should understand it. We should read it and try to be prepared for what may happen if President Trump is reelected this November, no matter who his vice president is. And it does appear right now that President Trump will be reelected. Now, could that change? Of course, it could change. Nothing is a certainty in politics. Trump could die for all anybody knows. Biden could do marvelously at the next debate, or whoever replaces him, say Kamala Harris, if she's coached sufficiently, might do marvelously. Nobody really knows, but we should be ready for what may happen nevertheless. Again, this is the reason why I suggested, it's only suggested in the previous podcast, why it might be a good idea to at least consider the possibility of sneaking off to some other part of the world when the time is good. Now, one other point which is unrelated that I wanted to raise before wrapping this thing up. Why was I flustered in the previous podcast when I used the term pundit? Because I suddenly realized that maybe I am one. A pundit is a wise person by definition, right? And by etymology, it's a wise person. But when I have seen a lot of people who are called pundits on television, many of them seem far from being wise to me. And I'm sorry, maybe I'm being judgmental. I guess I am, but I see nothing wrong with evaluating things carefully. And so the idea that I may be falling into the category of being a pundit, on the one hand, I hope not. On the other hand, I would say that if it is true that I am, that I want to at least be a better pundit than some of the pundits that I have seen. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them have been. And I will leave it right there for the time being. This has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.